I am a 24-year-old woman. My cousin and I decided to travel a few hours north for a relaxing winter cabin weekend. It went well. There was no creepiness involved. On our last day, we packed at 6 a.m. and got into the car to get an early start on the 5-hour journey ahead of us. It was a misty morning, not actively snowing, but prior snowfalls had piled up, making the travel dangerous in the dark early hours. My cousin was driving, and we were conversing and listening to podcasts while not paying close attention to our surroundings. Unfortunately, about 20 minutes into the drive, the automobile went off the road and clipped a tree just slightly. We went out to look, and by some miracle, there was no damage to the car, so my cousin and I began laughing in relief and thanked our luck. I shielded my eyes because some moron with crazy high lights was coming up behind us so loudly that my cousin laughed and started to open her door to step back in, but then the car blasted its horn and continued to do so as it approached us. My cousin and I exchanged perplexed glances before hastily returning to the car. The car started to slow down, and we noticed a man in the driver's seat. He eventually stopped honking and pulled up next to my cousin's car, which was idiotic because we were off-road and it was really slippery. He rolled down his window, then signaled for my cousin to do the same. We believe it was fine because he was still in his car while we were in ours. "Hey there, ladies, in a rush this morning?" He laughed. Not really, just trying to get home. Can we help you with something?" Cousin replied in her tone, fully stone-faced and poker-faced. "Oh no, I just noticed you dropped something about 2 kilometers back. It fell from your trunk." My cousin turned to face me. "Did you close the trunk when we left?" "Yeah, man, clearly," I responded, understanding how the car is designed. "We would have undoubtedly noticed or heard an open trunk." "No thanks, mister. I believe you have us mixed up with someone," my cousin answered quickly, rolling up her window. The man gave off a terrible vibe before blasting his horn again and motioning for us to roll the window back down. My cousin grudgingly rolled it down a little, holding up women's underpants while smiling. "Does this seem familiar?" He said it, and I can still hear the tone he used. "No. Thank you, sir. Have a fantastic day." Now, my cousin said, swiftly rolling up the window and flooring it. We got back on the road, and happily, the man appeared taken aback or decided to give up since we didn't see him for the next hour or so. Both of us were shaken, but we tried to laugh it off because we were safe and hadn't seen his car following us. We stopped at a Starbucks for gas and breakfast around 2 hours into the trip. My cousin and I placed a mobile order, and I dashed inside to retrieve our food and beverages. It had begun to snow by this point, and despite the fact that the sun had risen, the weather remained hazy and dismal, making visibility difficult. As I reached for our dinner, someone reached over and grabbed a napkin. I flinched back, and when I looked up, I nearly lost consciousness. That was him. There is no doubt about that. "Look at us like old friends," he added, smiling. I instantly looked down, grabbed our meal, and began walking away. As I was leaving, I overheard him say to the barista, "See that beauty queen? That is my gorgeous queen." Terrified, I rushed back to the car, nearly tripping because I couldn't walk properly. In my panic, I got in and screamed, "We need to get back on the road. He's inside the Starbucks." My cousin laughed, believing I was pranking her, but realized I wasn't when the man walked out of the Starbucks a few seconds later. He was going straight toward our car, waving at us, with no drink or food in his hand. My cousin hastily started the car as the man dug into his pocket. I was expecting him to pull out a weapon, but instead he held up the previously worn underpants. Fortunately, my cousin did not hesitate, backing out and speeding back onto the highway. We were freaking out, not understanding how he had ended up at the same stop as us while never seeing him behind us. Maybe he used back routes, but it would have taken him much longer to get there. Was he trailing us? We didn't realize we had located another route on our Maps app and chose to take it in the hopes that it would help. Unfortunately, as we drove through a tiny town, the car began to seem lower on my side. We pulled over at a well-lit gas station and noticed the tire was losing air. We were too terrified to go out alone, so we went out jointly and rapidly filled it with air. We resumed our journey as everything appeared to be in order. Everything was well for about 10 minutes when a car arrived out of nowhere behind us. My cousin and I exchanged startled glances, unsure what to do. Our fears were verified when he blared his horn again and swerved off the road to draw up next to us, this time on my side. His window was rolled down, and he yelled at us. At this time, I didn't care and called my brother-in-law, a cop. I realized I should have contacted the cops right away. It was a terrible decision, but I was attempting to reduce the gravity of the situation in my thoughts. He told us to drive to the nearest police station and phone them so they might be warned, just like my brother-in-law was. While lecturing me, the creep abruptly slammed on his brakes, coming to a halt on the snow-covered, treacherous road. We hurried away, making it harder to see him, but before we lost sight, I noticed he'd gotten out of his car and was sitting on the hood, just sitting there in the frigid, snowy weather. My cousin and I had no desire to stop or do anything else. With approximately an hour left on our trip, we decided to book it straight home. Fortunately, this was the last of it. We know we made a number of silly mistakes that could have had disastrous repercussions, but I'm just glad we came out alive and unhurt. I'm still not sure how he caught up with us so quickly or why he just sat there at the finish, but I don't want to find out. I lived in New Mexico for several years before relocating to the Midwest. My female buddy Amy and I would spend several days traveling to isolated areas of New Mexico, uncovering abandoned ghost towns and admiring the desert's calm, lonely beauty. One afternoon in March 2010, we were driving from Ruidoso to Albuquerque. Is always up for an adventure, so we took a back route rather than the more direct freeway. One section of our adventure took us down NM 55, a lonely, teeny-tiny two-lane highway. We used to enjoy driving on those types of roads. This section of New Mexico is a flat, lonely desert. You can see for miles, and there is almost nothing but dirt and rock between towns, which can be miles apart. So we were on NM 55 heading north. After a few minutes, we noticed a white pickup truck ahead of us driving in the same direction. He abruptly stopped his truck sideways in the center of the highway, blocking both lanes. We were approximately a mile away from him, and as we approached, we became apprehensive. We could see no need for him to do this. We were the only other vehicle on the road, and we began to consider turning back rather than approaching him and having to stop. We were approximately a half-mile away from him when he pulled over on the opposite side of the highway, but his truck remained aimed in the direction we were traveling. We attempted to relax a little. Surely, this man was a rancher or something. Perhaps he was checking something on his property. As we passed him, we saw two things. First, there was only one person in the vehicle, a middle-aged man who never looked away from us. And second, he was chatting into a walkie-talkie. A few seconds after we passed him, he returned to the highway and began following us, although he never got too near. He would get to within a few vehicle widths, then back off slightly before speeding back up to within a few car lengths. We were growing anxious. We realized how isolated we were. We had seen no other vehicles on that route, and we hadn't told anyone about our brilliant decision to take this detour. We checked our cell phones, and neither had a signal, which is common for isolated New Mexico, but concerning considering our current circumstances. Amy was driving and speeding up while I hurriedly searched the map for a road with more traffic. There was no other road. We had to take this one to reach the next town mountain. Turning around and going back the other way didn't seem like a good idea. After a few minutes, another pickup truck approached us. He was moving at a snail's pace, perhaps 20 miles per hour at most. This pickup was old and messed up, while the one behind us was newer. Amy got us up to 75, and we sailed past the old truck. As we passed it, we noticed another middle-aged man talking into a walkie-talkie. After the white pickup passed him, he made a U-turn and drew up behind it. As we watched, we could see the white pickup truck driver chatting into his walkie-talkie. These two must have known each other. We were being actively followed, and for the first time in my life, I felt pursued. They remained directly behind us. We kept an eye out for roadside impediments. We honestly believed that the old beat-up pickup guy had set up a trap in the road and would disable our vehicle in some way. We discussed driving into the countryside. We were in an SUV, but this was clearly their area, and we were concerned about what would happen if we went off-road and got cornered, so we stayed on the highway. By now, the white pickup truck driver was right on top of us. We could see him speaking into the walkie-talkie, and he remained right on our bumper. The old, beat-up pickup truck driver was directly on top of him. The three of us sped down the highway as the white pickup approached. His maneuvering and edging closer made it clear that he was attempting to bump us. I watched helplessly as he came within inches of our back bumper. Amy crushed it. We were passing 80 and pushing closer to 90. The road seemed flat and deserted, yet even a minor mishap could be disastrous. We would not slow down or halt if we could help it. The white pickup drove into the opposite lane and began to accelerate. The only thing we could think of was that he wanted to pass us and move ahead of us. If he got in front of us while his friend was behind us, we'd be boxed in and trapped. We stared wildly at the stony desert on either side of us. Our only alternative was to take it off-road. Should we take a risk? Could we hurry through the desert and get to safety in one piece? As we ascended a slight slope, we noticed a sign that proclaimed Salina Pueblo Missions National Monument and pointed to a road on the left and right, at which point a blue pickup vehicle pulled out of that road and onto the highway in front of us. As we approached the blue truck, we noticed the plates saying U.S. Park Service. We exchanged glances before turning to check behind us. Both pickup vehicles made U-turns and drove the other way. We followed the blue pickup to Mountain A and then headed to Albuquerque. I'm not sure what the guys' goals were, but they were not good. There's something horribly wrong out there. I alerted the state police, who indicated they'd keep an eye on things. This place is quite close to Belen, New Mexico, where Terra Calico was stolen. It's also roughly 100 meters from Elephant Butte, where David Parker Ray had his small hidden torture laboratory. We didn't connect the dots until later, despite the fact that David Parker Ray had died by the time this happened to us. We suspect there are more out there like him, and whomever kidnapped Tara has never been apprehended. It's possible that we ended up in a meth lab area, but given that this happened on a highway rather than a backwoods road, I prefer to dismiss that hypothesis. Whatever is happening out there is not good. I was approximately 8 years old when my mother, little sister, and I went on a road trip across Wyoming. This wasn't unusual because we had family spread across the state, and my mother enjoyed packing us into the car and driving. My memory of this occurrence is spotty, and I recall it more for how my mother responded than for the event itself. I can't recall where we were or where we were going, but everyone who has driven through Wyoming knows that the roads are usually vacant. We had been driving for several hours behind an old green and white vehicle. We were approaching a gas station, and I remember my younger sister being overjoyed because she wanted to get those small wax bottles with the contents. A green and white truck drove into the service station, and we followed. We used the restroom, got some food, my mom filled up the gas tank, and we got back in the car and continued on the road. After a short while, my mother inquired, "Is that truck behind us the same one we followed into the gas station?" I turned in my seat to confirm that it was the same truck. I sat back down and continued snacking, but I could see my mother was concerned. She kept looking in her rearview mirror and watching the truck. It was a long journey to the next gas station, and the vehicle behind us would accelerate up and approach dangerously close before backing away slightly. After several miles, we were approaching another petrol station. My mother adjusted the mirror so she could see us in the back seat. She said, "I'm going to pull into this gas station and open the door as if I'm getting out. I don't want you two to unlock your doors. Don't leave. Just sit tight and hold on." My younger sister and I gazed at each other. I thought it was strange, but the expression in her eyes terrified me a little. My mother is a peaceful lady, but she exudes a presence that makes you realize that she is not to be messed with. All of my friends have been terrified of her throughout the years, which is strange given that she is just over 5 feet tall and weighs around 100 pounds. Anyway, we pulled into the station and went up to the pump. My mom adjusted her mirror to view behind us and opened the door while the car was still running. The green and white truck approached and parked just to the side of the curb. The driver popped his hood, got out, walked around to the front of his truck and propped it up. He began fooling around beneath the hood with his back to us. From what I recall, he was a very large man, but who isn't to an 8-year-old girl? My mother slammed her door and bolted out of the gas station. I turned in my seat to face the man. He whirled around as if shocked, glanced directly at us, and hastily closed his hood. Even though he had only been peering in there for a few seconds, my mother was driving so quickly that I lost sight of him. I was afraid, and I knew my mother's driving was serious. The road ahead twisted abruptly to the left, and to the right was a little lane with a few buildings. Just before the turn, my mother slammed on the brakes, wrenched the steering wheel all the way to the right, and slid around the corner like a scene from an action movie. She sped through one of the building's little parking lots before parking behind it. From our viewpoint, we were hidden from traffic behind us, but could see anyone passing by. A short while later, we saw the green and white vehicle drive past us and around the bend in the road. Obviously, my sister and I were really shaken. My mom asked if we needed to use the potty, and I answered yes. She agreed, but we'd wait here for a bit before moving on to the next station. I'll never forget what she said next since it was completely out of character for her. She stated, "I would rather piss my pants in this car than be murdered on the side of the road." After a short break, we returned to the road and resumed our journey. We never saw the truck again. I was on a cross-country road trip with my colleague. We were going through West Texas on a major highway, which was itself rather barren. There had been a truck stop or gas station every 100 miles, and each one was isolated, with no other structures visible. These were not towns, but rather exits, where you could buy additional gas to drive to the next gas station. It was late at night, and she'd been driving for perhaps 4 hours. I can typically drive for around 8 hours before I get fatigued, but she could only go 4 or 5 before it was my turn again. We were also running short on gas, about a quarter tank, and she had learned from previous road trips to fill up whenever possible, so she was looking for a gas station as we drove. Really corny, but we were talking about fate and destiny and other strange things at the time. That type of discourse gets me worked up and scared, so I tried to change the subject. While we were conversing, she took an exit, and I took out my coffee mug to refill it before my turn driving. We pulled into a typical Nowhereville gas station, with simply the station and a trailer in the back. Thinking back, I assume it was where the owners resided. Another car was parked in front of the doors to one side. We stepped out, still talking, and walked up to the double doors, each gripping a handle. The doors were locked. I glanced around to see if there was a notice. Some restaurants may post a back in 5 minutes sign. I noticed several things in quick succession. The coffee maker inside was halfway through brewing a fresh pot of coffee. The store monitors were visible from outside, but they were all static, and there was a splash of bright red on the closed door in the back. I immediately realized I was looking at a large streak of blood with handprints on it. The hairs on my neck rose up. My friend started shaking the door, saying, "We need gas," but I had already turned and walked away from the doors. "We need to leave now." I grabbed her arm and began propelling her back toward the car. I just spotted another automobile in the parking lot. It had no plates, was dirty, and had dents. There was an empty rifle rack in the window. I dashed to the car, dragging her with me. She appeared to take forever to open her door and enter. She kept replying, "But we need gas," even as I tried to explain that there is blood in there. She finally got the car out after what seemed like a year. When we were pulling up, I noticed through the windows that the gas station's back door was opening. Before anyone came out, we had pulled away. Fortunately, I freaked out until we were 20 miles down the road. I attempted to phone the police, but received no signal. I didn't obtain a phone signal until we had driven about 40 miles and arrived at a truck stop which was not in a town, but rather a building. In the midst of emptiness, I called the cops. They thanked me, but I never heard anything further about it. To this day, I believe that if I hadn't freaked out, we would have met the robber or whatever was in the rear room of the restaurant where this occurred. On Saturday, my girlfriend Tess, puppy Jack, and I were preparing for a road trip. We planned to meet some friends at their place and then begin our journey to their house at 11 a.m. A white automobile with tinted windows cut us off and brake-checked us close enough that I had to slam on the brakes and swerve to escape an accident. I honked and turned the motorist off. I wish I had not done this. The motorist immediately pulled down his window and waved his hand across. He slowed and returned to the other lane, bringing our automobiles parallel to each other. As we drove down the avenue, the driver began gesticulating and cursing at us. I made calm-down motions and tried to ignore him while driving. However, he continued to drive right next to us, As I tried to accelerate, he revved in front of me and attempted to brake check me again. I swerved into the other lane, but he slowed down again to match my vehicle speed. He was continuing to gesticulate and scream while I tried to ignore him. He reached into his lap, and I noticed he was clutching a glass bottle. He tossed it, and it smashed into the side of my car. Tess was frantic at this time, and Jack was hiding beneath the passenger seat. As the chase progressed, I got into adrenaline mode and began turning onto other streets. He was close behind when he flung another glass bottle, shattering against my back window. When we rushed down a two-lane roadway, I begged Tess to call the cops. When we crested a hill, she dialed 911. As I came to a halt at the light at the top of the hill, the man pursuing us halted behind us. He jumped out of his car, and in my rearview mirror, I saw him reach back into it and grab something, which he stuffed into his shorts. He started walking near my side. The automobile in front of me drove away. I panicked, hit the gas, and drove onto the next road. Within a minute, he caught up with us. By then, I was on the phone with 911, explaining the issue and providing specifics about his automobile and appearance. Tess was crying as we sped down a major avenue, weaving between automobiles at 20 miles per hour above the speed limit. I kept updating the dispatcher on our location, and she instructed me to go to the station at the next red light. He cried, "Now, audible, is there a problem? Do not, __ flip. I'm off." I motioned that we had no difficulty attempting to de-escalate the situation. He was still attempting to get me to get out of the car. The light remained red, so he exited his vehicle once more. I sped past the red light, and he followed me as I approached the police station. We were accelerating and braking against each other as he attempted to drive me off the road. I gestured for him to continue following, hoping to bring him to the station, which was about a block away from the police station. We got stranded at a major intersection. There were numerous automobiles around as he approached my car again. This time, I was hemmed in and Tess was terrified. I feverishly searched for any way out, but to no avail. The drivers around us became aware of the situation, and several rolled up their windows and closed their doors. He came right up to my window, smacked it with his palm, and asked again, "Is there a problem?" I firmly declined. The 911 dispatcher over the phone instructed me not to engage. He said his goodbyes, got back into his car, and accelerated away. We met with the cops 20 minutes into this awful automobile chase, but they stated there was nothing they could do, despite the fact that I updated them with fresh information about his heading and last known location. We resumed our journey after a brief respite.